When I came home from school that day, I could tell something was off. My mother seemed unusually troubled and distracted. I asked her what was wrong, but she just said, "Eat your meal first. We'll talk about everything else later." Her response only heightened my suspicion that she was hiding something serious. It must be something important, I thought, watching her expression carefully. I couldn't help but feel a knot of worry in my stomach. My hand, which had been lifting a forkful of food, froze midair. I suddenly lost all appetite. Noticing my reluctance to eat, my mother gently said, "Please eat properly. You spend all day at school exhausting yourself, and you never eat enough." But I couldn't continue. "I'm full," I said, pushing my plate away. "Please, tell me what's wrong." She hesitated for a moment, then finally told me the news. Ahmad uncle, our landlord, had asked us to vacate the house. He'd given us 1 month's notice to find another place to live. As her words sank in, I felt a wave of dread. This had been our home for 2 years, and we'd never had any trouble. We paid our rent on time, and Ahmad uncle had always been kind. He never caused us any problems and was even quick to fix any small repairs we needed. So why now? The thought of finding a new place seemed overwhelming. Decent rental homes were scarce, and landlords these days seemed to have endless demands. We were just 2 women living alone, and it was hard to imagine where we would go. I told my mother, "I'll talk to Ahmad uncle myself. Maybe I can find out why he's suddenly asking us to leave." That evening, I planned to call him, but before I could, he came to our house himself. He greeted me warmly, but I could see the regret in his eyes. "Beta," he began hesitantly, "I'm so sorry. I didn't want this to happen, but I have no choice. My son and daughter-in-law aren't getting along with my wife. My daughter-in-law says she can't stay under the same roof as my wife anymore. She wants to live separately. This house is the only other place I have to give them. I thought it would be best to settle the matter peacefully and let them live here." Listening to him, I couldn't help but feel sad. Ahmad uncle was a good man. He had only 1 son, and now even that son wanted to move away from him. It must have been heartbreaking. He had taken great care in choosing his son's bride, hoping for a harmonious family. But despite all his efforts, his daughter-in-law turned out to be a poor match. I understood his predicament, but that didn't make our situation any easier. This house had been a haven for my mother and me. It was safe, comfortable, and provided a sense of security that was hard to come by, especially for 2 women living on their own. Leaving it was going to be very difficult. But Ahmad uncle's hands were tied. He didn't want to turn us out, but his family circumstances forced his hand. With a heavy heart, I started looking for a new place. After school, I would visit property dealers, searching for a rental that would meet our needs. I even mentioned our situation to some of my teachers, hoping someone might know of a place. One day at school, my colleague Sobia pulled me aside. "There's a vacant house in our neighborhood," she said. "You should come see it. Inshallah, it'll work out for you. It's close to the school, and my house is nearby too. That way we can keep in touch." Her words brought me a glimmer of hope, and I couldn't help but smile. Sobia and I had become close friends after joining the school together. Unlike her, I didn't really speak to many others at work. I had started this teaching job 3 years ago, initially as a hobby. Back then, my father was alive and I didn't need the income. He happily gave me permission to work, and I enjoyed it. But when he suddenly passed away, the entire household burden fell on my shoulders. What had once been a choice turned into a necessity. The school staff was kind and supportive for the most part, but there were exceptions. The principal, for instance, sometimes changed his demeanor when I was alone. His glances, his tone, there was a shift that made me deeply uncomfortable. It hurt because I never had to endure such behavior while my father was alive. In his presence, no one dared to look at me the wrong way. But after he passed, everything changed. Even people in the neighborhood and distant relatives began to treat me differently. They avoided making eye contact, as if seeing me alone made them think I was vulnerable and easy prey. My mother often said, "A lone woman has no place in this world." She believed that a woman stepping out to work had to face more than just stares. She had to endure endless whispers and rumors. She had said this when I first insisted on getting a job, and she had been firmly against it. "You've completed your education," she argued. "It's time to get married and settle into a proper home." but I wanted to put my education to use. I wanted to carve out my own path. My father had been my biggest supporter, encouraging me every step of the way. My mother didn't realize at the time how much that job would come to mean. After his passing, that teaching job became our lifeline. With him gone, many of our relatives turned cold. People who used to dote on my mother now avoided her altogether. She had once been the one everyone consulted, the one they sought advice from. Now they didn't even bother to inform her of family events. It was as though our ties had been severed overnight. It wasn't just the coldness that hurt, it was the fear behind their behavior. They worried we might ask for financial help. I had made it very clear to my mother that no matter what, we would never ask them for anything. My salary was enough to keep us afloat, and we managed well enough. But we lived in a rented house, and that had its own uncertainties. Fortunately, Ahmad Uncle, our landlord, had always been kind. He never caused us any trouble, and he handled repairs quickly and without complaint. But then came the day Ahmad Uncle asked us to vacate. The news shook me. I had heard too many stories of harassment, of the difficulties single women faced when looking for housing. The thought of finding another place filled me with dread. When I told my mother about the situation, she simply said, "May Allah guide us to the right house, one that suits us, one with a reasonable rent." That evening, after dinner, I suggested heading out to see the place Sobia had mentioned. But my mother objected. "You just got back from school," she said. "You can't run off to look at houses right away. It's the middle of the day. This is the time to rest. You're tired from work and you need to relax. I'll come with you later, in the evening. It's not safe for you to go alone." I tried to convince her, reassuring her that I would return quickly. Reluctantly, she agreed, though I could see she wasn't happy about it. She was always protective of me, more so since my father's passing. I appreciated her concern, but I also knew that waiting too long could mean missing out on a good opportunity. I wanted to see the house for myself, to ensure it was suitable before making any decisions. Normally, I would have had my tutoring students over in the evening. For the past couple of days, I had let them know I wasn't feeling well and gave them the day off. But today I couldn't skip again. If I canceled another session, their families would start making comments, questioning why I wasn't holding my classes as promised. That's why I wanted to take care of everything before evening rolled around. Time was flying. Half the month was already gone. We had no choice but to vacate the house by the first of the next month, and I didn't want to put Ahmad Uncle in an awkward position. Whenever he brought up the topic of moving out, he looked genuinely uncomfortable, almost ashamed. Though he had every right to ask for his house back, his kindness shone through him. I knew he felt bad because he understood the challenges single women face in society. Still, as much as I sympathized with his situation, I couldn't stop worrying about ours. Where would we go? What kind of difficulties lay ahead? When I stepped outside, the scorching midday sun hit me like a wall of heat. It was blistering, but I had no choice. I needed to get this done today. Delaying it any further wasn't an option. As I walked out, I spotted Salman leaning against a shop across the street, chatting with his friends and chewing on pan. The moment he saw me, his eyes lit up. I felt a wave of annoyance wash over me. I hated running into him. His presence was always unsettling, and I instinctively turned my gaze away, pretending not to see him. Even from the corner of my eye, I noticed his reaction. He seemed surprised to see me out and about at that hour. Before he could approach, I stepped onto the road and quickly found a rickshaw. I gave the driver my destination, and he nodded, setting off down the street. Inside, there was another young man already sitting, and the two of them looked like decent, respectable people. I didn't pay them much attention. My mind was elsewhere. I kept going over all the things that could go wrong. What if I didn't like the house? What if the rent was too high? That would mean starting the search all over again. Lately, this whole process of looking for a place had been draining me, mentally and physically. As the rickshaw moved along, my wandering thoughts were interrupted by a glimpse of someone on a motorbike. For a moment, I thought it was Salman, but the helmet obscured the rider's face. Even so, I felt a pang of irritation just at the possibility. I turned away quickly, choosing to ignore it. But then I noticed something else. The rickshaw was no longer following the route I had given. It had taken a different turn. My pulse quickened. "This isn't the way I told you," I said to the driver. He responded calmly, "The main road is blocked. All the vehicles are using this shortcut. We'll reach there in just 10 minutes. His words didn't comfort me. My unease grew. What if he was lying? What if I ended up somewhere I didn't know? But seeing the look on my face, he tried to reassure me. "Don't worry, I'll get you there safely. If the main road wasn't closed, we'd be taking it right now. This is just a quicker route." He spoke in such a convincing way that I decided to let it go. Surely they seemed respectable. They didn't look like the kind of people who would try anything. Besides, I had taken rickshaws alone plenty of times before, and nothing bad had ever happened. Slowly, I started to relax. Lost in my thoughts again, I hardly noticed the time passing. But then, the rickshaw came to a stop in front of an old, crumbling building. I snapped out of my reverie and glanced around. This wasn't my destination. The sight of the rundown structure made me uneasy again, and I couldn't help but start looking around nervously. It was a desolate place, a dilapidated old structure that might once have been a gas station, but had long since fallen into ruin. The area was eerily quiet, with no sign of people coming or going. I looked at the young man and asked, "Why did you stop the rickshaw here?" His demeanor changed instantly. His tone grew sharp and impatient as he said, "Get down, now!" One look at him was enough for me to realize I was in serious trouble. Without wasting another moment, I jumped out of the rickshaw and began to run, but my efforts were futile. They quickly caught up to me, grabbed me by the arm, and started dragging me toward the decrepit building. I screamed and shouted for help, my voice echoing in the empty, lifeless surroundings. But before I could cry out any further, one of them clamped his hand over my mouth. "There's no point screaming," he growled. "No one's coming to save you. There's no hero out here, no one to help you. The sooner you do what we say, the easier this will be." My eyes widened with fear, and my heart pounded in my chest. My mother had warned me not to go out alone. She had offered to come with me in the evening, but I had ignored her advice, and now I was facing the consequences of that decision. This was the first time I had disregarded her guidance, and it had landed me in a situation that I could never have imagined. I tried to fight back, to free myself from their grip, but my resistance was weak against their strength. Before they could go any further, an elderly man suddenly appeared. He walked toward us, glaring at them. "What's going on here? Who is this girl, and what are you two doing?" he demanded. The young men hesitated for a moment, clearly startled by his presence. For a brief moment, hope flickered in me. Perhaps this man would intervene, would save me from whatever they were planning. But what happened next shattered that hope. One of the men pulled out a pistol, aiming it at the old man. "Whoever you are, get lost. Leave now and let us do what we want," he threatened. But the old man only laughed, a chilling, malicious laugh. "What's the problem if you let me join in?" he sneered. "It's not like anyone's going to find out." My heart sank. Instead of coming to my rescue, he was aligning himself with my captors. "Fine," one of the young men said grudgingly, "but you need to leave for now." The old man, however, wasn't so easily brushed off. He kept trying to persuade them, his stubbornness clearly frustrating the two men. As they argued, my fear shifted to anger. How could he stand there, making things worse? How could he have no regard for what I was going through? But their argument gave me an opportunity. A short distance away, I spotted a pile of loose dirt and some wooden planks lying on the ground. I seized the moment. Quickly, I scooped up a handful of dirt and threw it into their eyes. They yelled, momentarily blinded, and I grabbed one of the planks and hurled it at them before turning and running as fast as I could. I sprinted out of the building, my heart racing. They shouted after me, their footsteps pounding behind me. My scarf snagged on the doorframe as I fled, but I didn't stop. I didn't care. The only thing on my mind was getting away, saving myself from a fate that felt all too close. In that moment, flashes of newspaper headlines raced through my mind, images of other girls who hadn't been so lucky. I could see their faces in my mind's eye, could almost hear the cries of their families. Was I going to be another headline? Another tragedy? As the sound of their footsteps grew louder, I felt a surge of desperation. My breath was coming in gasps, and my legs were burning, but I pushed on. Suddenly, I saw the police. Relief flooded through me at the sight of their uniforms. They were coming toward us, and behind them, riding on a motorcycle, was Salman. Salman ran straight toward me. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice full of concern. He bent down and picked up my scarf, gently draping it over my shoulders. Then his expression hardened as he turned to the two young men who had tried to take me. His eyes burned with fury. I could see in his face that he wouldn't let them get away with what they'd done. For the first time, I felt safe. Suddenly, a voice rang out, "Sir, take Madam away from here. The media might show up any moment." It was the old man, the same one who had been present at the scene earlier. I glanced at him in surprise, wondering why he addressed Salman as Sir. Salman drove me home afterward, but before leaving, he scolded me harshly. "What made you think it was a good idea to go off alone to an unfamiliar place in the middle of the day?" he said. "It's a good thing I noticed that rickshaw taking a different route. When I saw that, I called the police and followed you. You could have brought your mother along. Don't you realize what could have happened? How would Auntie have felt if something terrible had happened to you?" His words left me feeling ashamed. "I only went to see a house for rent," I explained. "Ahmad uncle asked us to vacate our home." He looked at me in disbelief before saying, "You've always treated me as a stranger. If you just told me, I would have found a decent place for you myself. From now on, you don't need to go out for this kind of work. I'll handle it." I had always thought of Salman as a reckless, idle young man. But today, the way he saved me, the way he shielded me from harm, it changed my view of him. For the first time, I felt a genuine respect for him. He even insisted I keep this incident to myself and not worry my mother. I agreed and never mentioned it to her. A few days later, Ahmad uncle visited us again, bringing unexpected news. "I've reconciled with my daughter-in-law," he said. "You can stay here as long as you need." I was so relieved. My mother and I immediately thanked Allah for this blessing. With that, life gradually began returning to normal. Lately, however, I noticed something odd. Salman was nowhere to be seen. He used to be around the neighborhood so often, but now it was as though he had vanished. I couldn't help but feel a bit curious and, deep down, perhaps even expectant. I didn't know why, but a part of me was waiting to catch a glimpse of him again. A few days later, I came home to find several unfamiliar women in the house. They embraced me warmly, their affectionate greetings filled with enthusiasm. After they left, I asked my mother who they were. She smiled and said, "Why are you so impatient? Sit down, eat something first, and then I'll explain everything." There was a noticeable happiness in my mother's expression, but I was too eager to wait. I quickly finished my meal and then pressed her for answers. That's when she told me the truth. Those women were Salman's sisters and mother. They had come to propose a marriage between me and Salman. I stared at her, stunned. "Salman?" I asked incredulously. "He's an only child, and everyone knows he's been living here with no steady job or home. Everyone sees him as a wayward person. Why did you even let them in?" My mother's calm reply caught me off guard. "He isn't what he seems," she said. "He's a good man." Her words only made me angrier. "Sure, he helped me out when I was in trouble," I snapped, "but that doesn't mean I'm going to marry him." And then, for the first time, I told her the truth about what had happened that day. As I recounted the events, my mother's jaw dropped in shock. "You should have realized what a good person he is," she said finally. "Instead of taking advantage of you, instead of tarnishing your reputation, he made sure you got home safely. And now he's stepping forward with a proper proposal." I couldn't deny that she had a point. Salman had handled the situation honorably, even when it could have gone wrong in so many ways. But still, I wanted a future with someone who had a respectable job and a stable position in society. I wasn't interested in marrying a man who had spent so much time loitering in the streets. For years, all I'd ever seen was Salman standing idly in the neighborhood. That image of him was hard to shake. When I told my mother what I had learned, she explained everything. Salman, as it turned out, was not just a loafing young man in the neighborhood. He worked for an undercover police division. There had been individuals in our area who were deeply involved in illegal activities, including the trafficking of arms and drugs. Outwardly, these men seemed respectable and had blended into the community so well that no one suspected their true identities. Salman, however, had grown suspicious of them and had been sent by his department to keep an eye on their movements. He adopted a casual, aimless persona as a cover and moved into our neighborhood so he could gather evidence without raising alarm. His seemingly idle behavior had been a calculated effort to stay close to those criminals. Now that they had been arrested and their guilt proven in court, his work was done. Salman no longer had any reason to remain here in disguise. That's why he had disappeared. He was back at his real home, and he had finally revealed his true self to us. His mother and sisters had asked my mother to keep this information confidential. They didn't want the truth about Salman's undercover role to be widely known. I listened to my mother's explanation in stunned silence. I had never even imagined that Salman was anything more than the wayward, carefree youth he appeared to be. I had misjudged him completely, dismissing him as just another irresponsible young man. But now, knowing the truth, I found myself reevaluating everything I thought I knew about him. My mother gave me time to think about the marriage proposal. She didn't pressure me, though it was clear she was pleased with the idea. As I reflected on what she had said, I began to understand that Salman had shown himself to be a good man. He had helped me in a dangerous situation without taking advantage of it. He didn't exploit the circumstances or let it tarnish my reputation. Instead, he had protected me and even stood up to make me feel safe. I realized that, had it been another man in Salman's place, things could have been very different. Someone else might have spread rumors, disgracing me in the process. Salman's character, his willingness to act without asking for anything in return, was something rare. He had handled the situation with decency and honor. My mother's words were true. Salman had proved himself to be someone I could trust. He had not only safeguarded my dignity, but was now prepared to offer me a stable future. The next day, I told my mother my decision. She smiled, relieved and happy. "This is what I hoped for," she said. "I wanted you to marry Salman. I think he'll be a good partner for you." Later, I spoke to Salman on the phone. I told him I wanted to continue working even after marriage, as I wished to remain responsible for my mother's well-being. Salman's response reassured me. "You have my full support," he said. "You can do whatever you want, and if your mother wants to stay with us, she's more than welcome. I'll take care of her as if she were my own mother." Hearing those words filled me with happiness. Salman's family was equally supportive. They were kind and welcoming, and they embraced my mother wholeheartedly. After we got married, I moved in with Salman's family, and although my mother initially hesitated, Salman insisted she join us. A few days later, he brought her to our home, making sure she felt comfortable and cared for. His family welcomed her warmly, making space in their hearts and home. As time passed, I came to see how correct my decision had been. Salman turned out to be an exceptional partner, someone who gave me a sense of safety and stability. I found myself thanking God often, grateful that he had blessed me with a husband like Salman, someone who stood by me, protected me, and treated my family as his own.